So just as a disclaimer, this video is meant to encapsulate Canadian anger first, and then discuss if it's justified. Right now, the average Canadian is frustrated, insulted, and honestly a bit betrayed by America. The relationship has always been close. Geography, trade, and history made it that way, but it's feeling more like a one-sided friendship lately. There's a sense that the US, especially under its current leadership, doesn't see Canada as an equal partner anymore. Instead, it's like Canada is being treated as a punching bag, or a problem to be solved, rather than a neighbor with shared interest. That stinks, because Canadians have long prided themselves on being America's reliable ally. Think hockey buddies who've got your back and not some pushover who you can boss around. The tariff threats have turned economic anxiety into outright anger for a lot of people. Canada sends over 70% of its exports to the US. This includes oil, cars, lumber, you name it. So the idea of slapping big taxes on that feels like a direct hit to their livelihoods. It's not just about money, it's personal. People are saying, why are they punishing us when we've been holding up on our end of the deal? Small businesses, workers in border towns, and families who've built their lives around cross-border trade are scared. They see it as America flexing muscle without caring who gets hurt. And that's hard to swallow when you've spent decades thinking you're on the same team. Then there's the 51st state rhetoric. What started as a quip has morphed into a sore spot. Fast. To Canadians, it's not funny. It's a slap in the face to their identity. They're proud of being Canadian, not American, and the idea of being swallowed up by the US feels like an attack on their sovereignty. Imagine someone joking about taking over your house because they don't like how you mow the lawn. It's that kind of vibe. It sparked a defiance you don't always see in a country known for being polite. People are digging in, saying, we're not your backyard to annex, and that's fueling a surge in national pride. But it's a prickly, defensive, not the warm and fuzzy type. Day to day, this is showing up in real ways. Some Canadians are quietly, or not so quietly, boycotting American products, as I'm sure we've seen on social media. Grocery stores have Buy Canadian signs popping up, and folks are skipping trips to the US for shopping or vacations. Social media is full of rants about canceling Florida getaways or selling off US vacation properties. It's not everyone, but it's enough to notice. There's a bitterness creeping in, a feeling that America's turning its back on a friendship that's been pretty damn solid for a century. You'll hear people say they don't hate Americans, the people, but they're fed up with the government, the policies, and the attitude that seems to ignore how interconnected the two countries are. Underneath it all, there's a mix of emotions. Older folks might feel nostalgic for the days when the border felt more like a formality than a battle line. Younger ones are just pissed, seeing the US as a bully rather than a beacon. And yeah, there's some hate. Not universal, but sharper than it's been in a long time. It's less about individuals and more about a system that feels like it's steamrolling. They're not burning American flags in the streets, but they're not singing Sweet Home Alabama either. The vibe is tense, and the trust is fraying. That's the truth from their side of the fence right now. Now let's discuss something that may be a little bit more uncomfortable. How reliant is Canada on the United States? And how justified is their hate towards the United States? Now that we understand the average Canadian's perspective, we're going to move on to the average American's perspective. So let's cut through the noise and get to the raw truth about Canada's reliance on the US, and how this relationship has skewed in ways that might make it look like Canada's been riding America's coattails a bit too comfortably. This isn't about feelings, it's about the numbers, the dynamics, and the unspoken reality of who's holding the bigger stick. Canada's economy is tethered to the US like a lifeline. Over 70% of its exports, think oil, natural gas, vehicles, and machinery, goes straight to the American market. It's not just a trade preference, it's a sort of dependency. The US buys about $450 billion worth of Canadian goods annually, give or take, depending on the year, while Canada only takes in, at most, $300 billion from the US. That imbalance means Canada's prosperity, jobs, infrastructure, the whole deal, leans heavily on American demand. If the US sneezes, Canada doesn't just catch a cold, it's bedridden. Let's look at energy alone. Canada pumps out crude oil and ships most of it south because its own refining capability is pretty small for a country that size. The US is the customer, keeping Canada's resource engine humming. Then there's the supply chain. Canada's manufacturing, especially autos, relies on the US parts and markets. Take Ontario car plants. They're basically an extension of Detroit's assembly lines. Without seamless access to the US, those factories would grind to a halt. And don't forget the border. Thousands of trucks cross daily, carrying everything from lumber to beef. Any hiccup, like tariffs or tightening security, chokes Canada way harder than it does the US, because America's got bigger, more diversified economy to fall back on. Canada? Not so much. It's a small player. Population, 400 million versus 330 million. And its domestic market can't absorb what it produces. Now let's flip the script. How's this been unfairly favoring Canada? For decades, Canada's gotten a sweet deal under the US security and economic umbrella. NATO and NORAD are prime examples. The US foots the bill for the heavy lifting, military spending, global policing, while Canada pitches in a fraction. America spends about 3.5% of its GDP on defense. Canada barely scraping together 1.4%, and it's not hitting NATO's 2% target. That means Canadian taxpayers save billions, letting them fund stuff like universal healthcare while the US keeps the continent safe from threats Canada couldn't handle alone. It's not just money, it's peace of mind. Canada's border with Russia is the Arctic, but it's the US radar and jets that patrol it. Trade's another angle. NAFTA, now USMCA, gave Canada access to the world's biggest market with minimal friction. Sure, the US benefits too, but Canada's the one whose economy would collapse without it. The US could pivot to other partners, China, Europe, Mexico, faster than Canada could find new buyers for its oil and timber. And yet, Canada often plays the victim card, griping about US policies while quietly pocketing the gains. Take softwood lumber. Canada's been dumping cheap wood into the US for years, undercutting American producers and crying foul when tariffs hit back. It's like borrowing your rich friend's car, denting it, and then complaining about the repair bill. Culturally and practically, Canada's been coasting too. Hollywood films on Canadian screens, US tech runs their lives, and American tourists prop up places like Niagara Falls. Meanwhile, Canada's contributions don't exactly balance the scales. It's not abuse in the malicious sense, but it's quiet freeloading. The US has been the big brother, absorbing the costs of military, market access, and global stability, while Canada's kept its wallet half closed, enjoying the perks without matching the investment. The relationship's not one-sided though. The US gets cheap resources and a stable northern flank, and a partner that's not a headache like others, but the scales tip heavily towards Canada's favor when you tally it up. If America pulled back, closed the border, cut defense ties, and shifted trade elsewhere, Canada would be scrambling, while the US would take a hit, but keep rolling. That's the truth. Canada's reliance is structural, and the US has been carrying more of the load than it gets credit for. Call it silence abuse if you want, a comfy habit that Canada settled into. It seems like the rich friend has woken up though, and I'm sure we can all agree this fallout isn't pretty. Thanks for watching, and feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments, and have a good day.